NASCAR's biggest race of the year and the beginning of a new era in the sport saw a brand new winner for the Cup Series. There's a lot to talk about from this race, a wild debut, and thankfully a safe one for the next-gen car. Let's talk about it. Happy birthday, Roger Penske, 85 years old. Wow. Austin Cindric is a Daytona 500 champion. We're going to talk about that in quite a bit because I have a lot of thoughts on it. I'll say this, deserving champion, very deserving champion. But I think the storyline of this race and really the whole weekend and really the whole year is the next-gen car. So that's kind of the connecting tissue that's going to weave its way through all of my points I'm going to talk about in this video, talking about this particular Daytona 500. Because in a lot of ways, it was different than what we'd seen before, and in a lot of ways, it was the same. Now, going into this race, my expectation and the expectation of a lot of folks was that the race was going to be spread out. And certainly the way this car drafts, had there been more green flag pit stop sequences, especially with the manufacturer games that we saw played in the duels, I think we would have seen that play out. And we did see that play out in the first stage. But ultimately, a combination of the stage cautions and also the wheel issues that we'll talk about here in just a second really kept the field tight the entire race. It really was, in a lot of ways, more of the same for the Daytona 500. And you either like that or you hate that. Obviously, to me, the hateable part of it is the Demolition Derby part. But, without getting too far into things I need to talk about later, it did seem like this car was a lot more raceable than the previous generation 6 cars. It seemed like they weren't quite as much of aero monstrosities in the sense of you could get a run, you could pass people, but it wasn't to the point of insanity with the runs where guys were really making some bad decisions or forced into places where they made bad decisions. Now, were there still drivers who made bad decisions? Brad Keselowski? Yes, there were. And we'll talk about them in just a second. But we need to talk a little bit about the reliability issues with the next-gen car. Now, it didn't play out quite the way maybe some forecasted it would. The big issue seemed to be the new single-lug wheels. Now, we saw one issue with Kaz Grala. Unfortunately, because of the Fox broadcast, it was kind of hard to tell whether it was a pit crew error or a mechanical failure, but ultimately he lost a wheel. That brought out the first yellow of the day. The second issue we saw was one of the Colleague Racing cars. The wheel just completely shattered and actually allowed a Goodyear tire all by itself without a wheel to roll down the track and cause another yellow. And really the third major failure we saw was Tyler Reddick, where the rear of his car just completely failed. I believe it was a toe link, and that ultimately sent him sideways and caused one of the crashes in the middle of the race. But speaking of crashes, obviously everyone's going to be talking about the big flip, and that was the crash of Harrison Burton for the Wood brothers. And unfortunately, we're going to be talking a lot about Brad Keselowski today, because Keselowski, big shove, and ultimately took out a lot of great cars, including Denny Hamlin and, of course, Harrison Burton. Christopher Bell, this year, no fault of his own involved in it. A couple of the Hendrick guys as well. Really unfortunate situation there. But I think the big talking point, obviously, is that Harrison Burton's car took off, did a blowover. One of the most classic blowovers we've seen in the modern era, I have to say. And I think the big factor in this is that, and why this happened, there's a couple of things, and I'll have to really take a good look at it, and maybe we'll find out in the coming days, because when we saw Tyler Reddick's car get backwards, we did see it start to kind of pick up off the ground, but NASCAR has an extra flap on the new diffuser on the rear of the car, which actually stood up, kept that car on the ground. I wonder if Keselowski hit the 21 car so hard that he broke that diffuser, and ultimately that roof flap on the diffuser didn't do its job. And the other problem, I think, is, and to me this is a concern going forward, I think for most tracks where you're running over 150 miles an hour, is the flat bottom of the next-gen car. Some people have brought this up, but it hasn't been a major talking point at this point. But in a lot of ways, and I remember saying this back when the next-gen car first kind of was starting to come out, which is this is a totally new, and this is something that people in the industry have told me, it's a totally new concept for what a stock car is and how it's designed. In some ways, or in a lot of ways maybe, it's a lot more like an open wheel or a sports car. With that flat bottom, what that does is when you get a little bit of air underneath it, and for whatever reason, if the roof flaps don't catch it quick enough, air gets underneath that thing, and because it's essentially a wing, it's a big kite, It's a big kite, it's a big airplane wing, and it picks the car up and throws it over. It's exactly what we saw with Harrison Burton. So I'm interested and curious to see if NASCAR makes any changes in the next couple of weeks to minimize that, because certainly Fontana is a place you can have a crash like Harrison Burton had, and certainly I think going to Atlanta when they have the non-750 horsepower package, they're essentially going to pack race at Atlanta. So that's another place where you could see some cars getting backwards and potentially getting airborne. And of course, this is where I have to talk about Fox Sports, because Fox Sports completely blew this broadcast. They blew over the broadcast worse than Harrison Burton. For whatever reason, Fox has just been off their game this year. I don't know what the deal is. I think we talked about it when I talked about the Clash. The duels were this way, qualifying was this way, and now the Daytona 500. You're zoomed in on things too much, too many tight shots. Some of the camera cuts were really strange. Weird onboard camera choices at times when you really want to be wide. There were points where there were clearly cars like having mechanical issues. I remember Daniel Suarez at the end of one of the stages, like there was smoke pouring out of his car, and we never got an update of what that was or even an identification on that car. I was just lucky enough that I could see, okay, it's a purple car on the apron, but we never had any other information, and that's amazing to me, because at one point in time, believe it or not, you can go back and watch it, 2001, 2003, 2002, around there, Fox Sports was the gold standard of NASCAR broadcasting, and in some ways you could argue at the time was the top of the game, period, in terms of auto racing broadcasting. They've completely fallen off, and I have no idea why. I don't know what's the problem, what's the issue, but it's a whole lot of little cuts too. You can't just point to one thing and say, that's the problem, and I don't know how you fix that one. I guess the big thing I said about the Clash was that seemed like a Fox Sports made-for-TV entertainment sort of thing. Maybe they want to produce entertainment and not sports anymore. Maybe that's the problem. The one thing that I will say that was an absolute positive, and I knew it would be a positive as soon as it was announced, is Tony Stewart in the booth. He and Clint Boyer just went hammer and tongs. I mean, that was probably one of the most entertaining things, and I thought Mike Joy, was hilarious. He said, "Oh crap," after the big one. Some people were mad about that. I'm fine with it. I thought the booth was the redeeming. I mean, because if you think about it, think of a broadcast booth that maybe you don't like as much as Fox Sports. If you're not a Mike Joy fan, think of the lead commentator that you like the least, and then think of some of the analysts you like the least. And then consider, it would have been like the ARCA race. It would have been just a completely disjointed broadcast, and you would have been like, ooh. So I think the booth really elevated Fox Sports a lot higher than their broadcast quality actually was. And of course the advertisements were just ridiculous. And I understand, man, like a lot of ads on a broadcast is a good thing because it means advertisers are want to pay Fox and NASCAR to advertise on the product. I understand that, but nah, man. Nah, it ain't working for me, dog. They got to figure out a better way to integrate those ads in. And it was hilarious when they did one of the mid-race Busch Beer ads and there was a wreck and they had to cut away from it. Keselowski was a weapon today. There's no doubt about it. He obviously caused the first big one, and he caused Ricky Stenhouse Jr. It cost him a shot at a win, and I thought Ricky Stenhouse Jr. drove the smartest he's ever driven on a plate track, even his wins. I think he would have been a deserving winner today had he made it to the finish and not gotten Keselowski'd. But, yeah, shame for Ricky Stenhouse, and that ultimately took out Brad's teammate, Chris Buescher, and might have cost Brad Keselowski the win. So I think in some ways karma kind of came back to haunt him. And there were a lot of people who ran really smart races. Al Mirola was another one that I thought was just really smart. Just showed up at the end all of a sudden and was there racing for the win. Chase Briscoe was a lap down at one point or was fighting to stay on the lead lap, was aggressive when he needed to be, but wasn't overly aggressive. You saw so many drivers, Kyle Larson, Kevin Harvick, got a little too aggressive at points and crashed. Those guys didn't, and they ended up finishing a lot better. So the good part about the next-gen car, and it's that you can pass, right? I mentioned it at the beginning. These cars are not the aero monsters they used to be, and you saw it on that last lap, and you really saw it in the last lap of the duels as well, where runs were made, but it's kind of striking that good balance where you're not necessarily a sitting duck, but you can also pass the leader if you have the right opportunity. And that's where I get to Bubba Wallace, because Bubba Wallace, I get it, he's divisive. People don't like him, and some of those reasons are more legitimate than others, or perhaps way less legitimate than others. But you can't deny that Bubba Wallace is absolutely one of the best super speedway racers in NASCAR, and it's not even close. And one of these days, he's already won a race, albeit it was race shortened, but one of these days he's going to win at Daytona. This is his second time finishing second at the Daytona 500 and at the Daytona Speedway. Remember, the fall race is a thing too. This is his second place in a row. And I think about Bubba Wallace and this race, and I think about that contact that Brad Keselowski, when he spun Ricky Stenhouse made contact with Bubba Wallace, ripped his fender off. I think about when Cindric went up to block Blaney and Bubba had that run on the inside, how much drag that missing fender caused and how much of a difference that would have made in the finishing result had Bubba Wallace had a totally healthy steed underneath him. It would have been a hell of a lot closer, I can tell you that. Would it have gotten him the win? We'll never know. But again, I think Bubba Wallace is going to get one of these Daytona 500s one of these days. He's proved it time and time again that he can win the race. And finally, let's actually talk about the winner, Austin Cindric. I did some thinking because at first it seemed like, oh my God, it's another shocking winner. And I get it, he's driving for Penske, but it's his second Daytona 500. I know people keep calling him a rookie. Second Daytona 500. This car exists. Second Daytona 500. But when I started thinking about that first Daytona 500 Cindric had, he was running up front and led the race at points and really looked pretty strong. He was taken out in that late race accident, but he looked like a race-winning contender last year. And now that he has that 1 year of experience under his belt, comes back here in the lead Penske car and is able to do the job and win the race. And the more I watched that final lap where he blocked Blaney up to the wall, ultimately wrecked his teammate to win the Daytona 500, blocked Blaney up to the wall and then came back down to block Wallace for the win. That was as good as it gets, to be honest with you. That's about as much as you can. Because the worst thing you do if you block somebody for the win is wreck yourself. We've seen that so many times over the last few years. The leader at the white flag at the Daytona 500 rarely wins because they usually put a bad block or they just straight up get wrecked. Winning the Daytona 500, whether you like to hear this or not, ultimately comes down to whether you get wrecked or not from behind, or whether you can avoid getting wrecked from behind or not. And Austin Cindric found that formula and did not get wrecked coming to the line. So I think it's a good story. And certainly I guess I didn't realize he wears a Greg Moore helmet. Either I forgot that or just learned it today. But obviously Greg Moore was killed at Fontana in 1999 at the age of 24. You think about that, Greg Moore has had such an effect on auto racing despite we losing him at 24 years old. Think how many race car drivers had great careers and were rookies at 24 years old. Austin Cindric is 23 and wins the Daytona 500 with a Greg Moore helmet. Yeah, that's pretty cool, and certainly a big, from my perspective, certainly a big mark of respect for me, because Greg Moore was going to go on to Team Penske, and a lot of people who were close to him said eventually he was going to go to NASCAR with Team Penske. So that's pretty fitting. And I think Austin Cindric's going to be really tough this year. So tough, in fact, that I'm going to continue to challenge Team Penske. Hey, I know you can do a fourth car for the Indy 500. It would be pretty cool to have the Daytona 500 winner running the Indy 500 as well. Come on, let's make it happen. Come on, let's do it. Let's do it. But there we go, man. Daytona 500. I'll tell you this. There were a lot of apprehension going into this race, and I think for sure last night, NASCAR dodged a bullet with Myatt Snider. The fact that that car didn't hit a pole with the cockpit, it hit front and back. The center of the car wasn't affected at all, thank God. But man, sometimes I feel like these plate races are playing Russian roulette with a 6-shooter with 5.5 bullets in it. And NASCAR continues to miss. But, one of these days, man, I'm worried, because this style of racing, man, it makes me nervous. It makes me nervous. But a safe race today, and that's what counts. A positive winner, and I'm excited to see what Austin Cindric does the rest of the year. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more motorsport content. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. It's going to be a busy week here on the channel. I'm going to be flying tomorrow into Florida. I'm going to be meeting up with some YouTubers and Kart Chaser at Homestead Miami Speedway to do some go-kart stuff. So look out for that. And then I'm going to be staying, of course, for the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg coverage of that race. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. It's going to be fantastic. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.